Okay, so what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be talking to some brilliant guest speakers. I think today's guest speakers are up there with the best we've had. I think this topic as well is really important at this time, and is kind of, out of all the events we've done, I think it's got the potential to have the most kind of impact and the most like quite a lot of learnings from it. So yeah, we'll be meeting speakers. We'll be talking about what is Firestarters, and we'll be briefly discussing the challenge that we're kind of going over today around ethical investment. We'll put some more context around that before going into breakout rooms. And the breakout room sessions will be about half an hour. There'll be guest speakers in each one, and there'll be a member of our team in each one as well. But we'll talk through them a bit sooner. This intro is quite deliberately short, as it always is with Firestarters, because an hour and a half never feels like enough. It always feels like at the end the conversation could go on for a lot longer. So we do try and be brief at the beginning. But if anyone's got any questions or anything, feel free to just pop them in the chat or raise your hand using the raise my hand feature, or you can do it physically, and hopefully one of the team will see you, if not me. So what is Firestarters? Firestarters is a community of change makers putting purpose before profit. We get people from the private, public and third sector talking so the positive action can happen. We do this through live events, actionable next steps and community accountability. So Firestarters is community light fuel. So basically what it is, it's a bit of an alternative to other kind of network groups and stuff like that, that is tries to focus more on social impact and actionable next steps and inclusion and diversity and things that are close to our values at Matchstick, rather than sales and profit, which is the kind of networking landscape that we've become frustrated with before we started Firestarters at the beginning of 2021. So the challenge, and this is a very broad challenge. I appreciate that and I recognize that it's a very broad conversation. But the challenge is, how do we make investments in the Liverpool City Region more ethical? And I was saying just before we came on the call that I think this conversation takes place from two perspectives. It takes place from the perspective of investors who are trying to invest more ethically, and trying to invest in ethical, trying to make ethical investments. And I think it takes place from the perspective of ethical companies, purpose-driven businesses, and socially trading organisations that are dealing with the kind of challenges and the opportunities of trying to get investments and raising investments. And I think that's a really important conversation for those types of businesses, because I think that businesses that are kind of socially driven and values driven often forget about things like investments and the money side of things. I think that's why it's really important that we have these conversations. So in a minute, I'm going to be handing over very briefly for a bit of a keynote introduction from Erika Rushton from Kindred, who I'm sure many of you are aware of already. So just to provide a context around what we're going to be talking about with Erika. We're going to be talking about what the kind of investment landscape looks like for socially trading organisations in the region at the moment. Kindred have done a lot of work, but I'll let Erika introduce you, because we always say that we think that people introduce themselves much better than we can introduce them. So Erika, if you don't mind, could you please introduce yourself and some of the work you've done?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I can't see everyone, so
That's okay.
You have to wave at me if you want my attention. But yeah, my name's Erika Rushton, and well, because we've all looked at each other's art on the walls, I started out life as an artist and ended up working in money. And my business name is Creative Economist, and I did want to be called Creative Accounting, but I decided that I might get done if I got called that. So we abandoned that name and went for Creative Economist. But I think I do creative things with money, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Kindred. And some people have suggested that we may be disrupting what's known as the social investment market. So I'll talk a little bit about why that is and how we came to be here. I suppose a few years ago, I'd noticed that the Northwest had the lowest take-up of social investment nationally. And just this week, an assessment of the social investment market, a national commission, as sort of slated it really, and said the social investment market, initiated 10 years ago, much of it with public money, isn't fit for purpose. And I'd like to think that Kindred is trying to find a better way of doing that. So just to sort of talk through a little bit my understanding of that, I said to Aaron, I had to Google what ethical investment was in case I had it wrong, and I talked about the wrong thing. But I think, as Aaron said, it's like, looking for, are we bothered about where the money comes from? Are we looking for good money, or are we more interested in putting good or bad money to good use? And just to tell a couple of stories about that, I work with an organisation over in Manchester. I've worked with them for 7 years, and they've currently got a £7 million development on site. And they've gone from a 30 grand turnover to a 600 grand turnover in that period. So quite a successful creative organisation. And they were looking for money, and they were offered some money by an interesting Salford guy called Fred Dome, who set up Betfred, one of the eighth richest people in the country at that time. He might be 9th or 7th by now, I don't know, but made his money through gambling. And he offered that money. I've been working for him 2 years, and I thought, oh great, he's going to offer us the investment we need to get this roof mended and this building sorted and these creative people in some decent space. But they rejected that money because it came from gambling. Roll on to another 5 years of trying to get the money together and costs going up all the way along. And they eventually took money off the lottery. And it is questionable whether they took ethical investment, because it's all a kind of gambling, isn't it? And even if you go and look at the stock market and what people do there, it's kind of gambling. So my advice to people is, don't worry too much about where your money's coming from, but put it to good use and make it do good things. That's just a personal opinion. You may have different ethics. But I do think what you should put the money to is probably the thing I can talk most about. So what does Kindred do, and why did it come about? I had the luxury, probably 5 years ago now, of investing £300,000 with no strings. Prior to that, I'd worked for 20 years in different forms of economic development, regeneration, neighbourhood redevelopment, all that kind of thing, trying to make the world a better place. And after 20 years, investing £300,000, and I'd had budgets of 32 million, you know, at one point was the biggest budget I ever managed, I think. So it wasn't like I hadn't had any money, but that £300,000 did more than anything else I'd ever seen, because we invested in people's ideas and what they wanted to do, and didn't say, you've got to meet our criteria. It was answers on a postcard. You can do what you want, and as long as what you do is good for this place and has the potential to be viable, we will invest in you. And I think we invested in about 20 ventures. We invested £300,000. Within 3 years, they had a £3 million turnover between them, and far exceed that now. They brought 150,000 square foot of space back into use, employed 160 people, you know, things that 32 million had kind of tried and failed to do. So I thought it was onto something. Maybe this is the route to something. And I started working with Power to Change, a woman called Helen Heap from works with the Heseltine Institute doing research, but runs her own company as Seaborn Hill, and had an investment background, and eventually with the Combined Authority, to look at whether we could replicate that little £300,000 experiment at a bigger scale. And we went out and talked to 150 organisations that we didn't really have a name for at that point. We didn't want to go down the kind of social enterprise route, because that's a kind of an area of activity that a few people had kind of grabbed the label of and were arguing about what it meant. But nor did we want to go down the charitable voluntary route, because that tended to mean people who wanted grant, who would come back and back for more grant, but weren't viable in the long run. And we wanted to go in this middle area that we'd found when we were in our £300,000 experiment, this area of people who, yes, they needed a start, yes, they didn't have the privilege of 50 grand off some relative or rent-free space in their parents' home while they set up a business or whatever it was, but that we could give them that opportunity to do something entrepreneurial. And so we came up with the term socially trading organisations, which I notice is being used both nationally and by the combined authority. So there's influence for you. And quite a lot of people fall within that bag. We're trying to keep it as wide as possible. So anybody who works with social purpose but wants to earn a living, whether that's directly from customers or indirectly through contracts, but people who aren't forever reliant on charitable grants. And talking to those 150 people, we asked them, well, why don't you use the social investment in the region at the moment? You know, there was loads of it around, and they told us why, and they told us what kind of money they needed. And to put it more simply, a woman called Pat in Knowsley, who runs a thing called Better Lives, she said, actually, I want a pot of money that we own collectively, that I can take as much out as I need for as long as I need it. And then when I don't need it anymore, I want to be able to put it back so somebody else can have a go. And that is the underpinning principle of Kindred. There were some other things about people they didn't want to pay interest, that, you know, at the moment, at that time, the social investment funds that were knocking around wanted 10%, because they calculated these businesses as high risk, when in fact they're mostly not very high risk, because people have put their lives and souls and livelihoods into them, and no way are they going to let them fail. They're going to find a way. So they're pretty low risk, and investment in them is pretty distributed because they're mostly relatively small. So we got into redefining risk. We got into redefining what we meant by an interest rate. So we're interest free. We got into options to repay some of the investment back in social returns, because most social investors were greedier than the banks in many ways, because they wanted their money back and they wanted social outputs. Well, that's like getting paid twice, isn't it? So we said, okay, we won't do that. We'll try and let you pay some of that money back in social returns and some of that money back in money. And I think the thing I've most enjoyed is watching people move from a outfit called the Open Door Centre over on the Wirral. Lee, who runs that, said to me at one of the first consultation sessions, saying, you know, is there a need for a different kind of money in the region? He said, it all sounds very good, that, Erika, but loan, it's not for me. I'm sticking with grant. And watching somebody like him move and not only take loan, but begin to pay that loan back and look for more loan, and realise to what extent his business, which is around offering services to young people, people with depression, people with addictions, things like that, but in a really commercial way. Watching him begin to not just grow, but rapidly expand that business and employ other people and deliver more service is a real pleasure. And I think part of the job of Kindred is to move people from that sort of, we are a grant dependent region, to actually we are an economically trading region, which of course we were for centuries. I think the thing that I get real pleasure out of is having listened for 30 years to people say, this is how you do economic development, and what we need around here is some inward investors and some grade A offices to attract them. Actually, economics is about you trading with me and me trading with you, and me lending you some money and you lending me some money. And it's a really collective, collaborative, participative thing that we do between ourselves, whether we're at different sides of the world or around the corner. And yeah, so not only are we reinventing interest rates, I think we're remembering an understanding of economics that we were disempowered within, and we're beginning to claim back through Kindred. At the moment, we've put our first £1 million out. We did that in the middle of the pandemic last year. We were pretty harsh. We said, you've got to be in growth. You can't be pandemic dependent. But if you need money and you can grow with it, then we've got some money to invest in you. £5.5 million of our money comes from the combined authority, and the other 1.5 million comes from Power to Change. We've got a commitment to increasing that pot. We need it topping up by 2 million every 3 years. I'm told that's a progressive fund. So if only I'd known you could lose £2 million every 3 years and be called progressive, I'd have invented it years ago, but there you go. But that's the idea, that actually we're putting money to people and to places that other money doesn't reach. And so investing in kinds of entrepreneurialism that other money doesn't support. And we've got another £1 million. The second round has just launched. We managed in the first round to make it a non-competitive process, in that people elected in or elected out as we went along through the process, saying, yeah, I'm ready to take money, or no, I'm not, or oh, actually, now I think about it, money isn't really what I need. It's actually something else I need. It's an introduction, or it's a contract, or it's more customers, or whatever. So we don't only deal in money, we give out other kinds of support and are increasingly getting involved in helping people with property. But we're early doors. You know, we're only a year old. Louisa, who's on the call today, is one of our new board members. Thank you, Louisa. And maybe I should stop there. I was asked to get you talking, so maybe that'll get you talking.
That was a really good introduction. Thanks for that. I'm going to go straight into the panel in a minute, because we are a little bit behind. But just before I do, can I ask you just to define, in your eyes, what a socially trading organisation is?
So for me, a socially trading, when we first started, people were talking about Kindred. There was a lot of talk about, well, could it be only CICs? Could it be only charities? Did people have to have an asset lock? That kind of thing. And one called Fiona Shaw, a thing about homegrown businesses, when we were down at the Baltic having a conversation in the consultation about setting it up, said that she thought businesses should be judged on their behaviours, not their governance structure. And so we came up with the term socially trading organisation, because actually you can trade socially and be a limited company. You can trade socially and be a charity. You can trade socially and be a community land trust. So what we ask of people is that they reinvest their profits after all costs in their communities of interest. An awful lot of family businesses in the region do that. They're probably better social traders than some of the social enterprises I know.
That was great, thanks. Yeah, I think we'll go into the panel discussion now, just because I'm thinking of time. But we will open for the Q&A after the panel. Just go in slideshow mode. Can everyone see my screen all right? Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to do the same thing again. I'm going to cheat by asking the people on the panel just to introduce themselves. So if our panel guests are ready, could I start with Mark? Could I just ask you to briefly introduce yourself and kind of the work you would take 5,000 and your work with investments, please?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Matt Latham. I'm the co-founder of a company called Circa 5000. Previously, we were called Ticker. We founded in 2019, launched iOS and Android apps in February 2019. So we're coming up for 3 years being live. We're an impact investment app. So anyone can start investing for their own future, either in a pension or an ISA or a general investment account through our app. And we only offer investments that have a positive social or environmental impact. We have an office in Liverpool in the Albert Dock, where I'm sat now, and an office in London. Team is about 35 people now. We have 150,000 customers in the UK, and we've raised just on £10 million in VC investment and angel investment for our own business. And yeah, we're launching our own impact ETF funds in August this year, and looking to expand beyond the UK probably early next year.
What's that, Matt? Yes, circa 5,000. Great. I think I was saying to Clare before that I bought some of the first shares in the company when it was the first crowdfunding campaign these did.
Well, you sat on a paper profit at least for now, then.
Yeah. Johnny, can I come to you next, please?
Yeah, of course. Thanks very much, Aaron. I'm Johnny Clarke. I do a few things. So my actual main day job is I run a startup as well. It's not really ethical or interesting, but it's GDPR compliance as a service. So that's kind of my main focus right now, scaling that. But I'm very active, I guess you could say, in the technology ecosystem in Liverpool and really across the UK now. So I used to run a growth program called Activate that was geared towards early stage companies and helping people really get the foundations in place to grow a technology business. When I was running that program, I was kind of overwhelmed really by how many ethically and purpose-driven businesses came to us that were, maybe they're not necessarily developing cutting-edge tech, but they're using tech to do really good things and solve environmental, social, or kind of economic problems for people. As you'll see from the description under my name on screen there, I am an external consultant to the combined authority, so I'm not an employee, so can't get in trouble. But I advise on some of the technology-oriented business ecosystem kind of focused projects which come through the strategic investment fund assurance process to try and get them through and make them as strong as possible and kind of increase the chance of them succeeding and maximizing the value to everybody really within the city region if they do go through. And then the other thing that I do on there, I run the Liverpool chapter of Startup Grind. Startup Grind's a global community network of people that work in the technology startup sector. So once a month usually, I'll run a meetup in the Baltic. We all get together, we have some food and drink, and I'll do like a spotlight Q&A sort of interview with an interesting person in tech or an investor or just someone who's got a good story to tell, really. That's me.
Thanks, Johnny. Claire, can I come to you last, please?
Hi, everyone. So my name's Claire Lewis. It's great to be here with you today. So I've worn lots of hats through my career and wear lots of hats now. I think one of the relevant ones for today is I'm the project director for GATHER, which is a business support program for digital tech and creative businesses in the Liverpool City Region. But a little bit about my journey with ethical investment, or God, there's so many names for it, as Erika pointed out. What do you call it? Social investment, impact investment. Started when I was a founder myself. So I founded a sustainable e-commerce business back in, God, a long time ago now, 2003, 2004. I took investment from a venture capital firm and sold that business about 10 years ago. And then I went on to run an impact investment bank called Clearly So, and really got to see a lot of what was going on in the social investment market and a lot what was wrong with it, to be honest. So I completely resonate with Erika's comments from earlier. Other things I've done, so I'm freelance now, but I've done work with Co-op and developing their ventures and developing a community called the Federation, which was looking at developing a community of innovators, digital innovators aligned to cooperative values. I've done research with the Social Tech Trust recently, which was looking at socially traded organizations that were looking to raise finance. And I've also done a lot of work with ESG investors, and we published a book last year looking at that area. So yeah, this is an area that I've kind of been working around for many years now.
Claire has just reminded me as well, as like a bit I did miss off, sorry. So probably the most relevant to this really is, and so since then, in the past couple of years, I've invested my own money in a number of predominantly ethical tech for good early stage tech businesses. And then before that, before I was kind of in tech, I was doing economic development work in this space as well.
Actually, dropping that bombshell at the end. Okay, that's great. I think we'll go straight into questions. If anyone does have questions, feel free to just kind of, I said earlier, but stick your hand up using the raise my hand feature in Zoom, or you can do it by raising your hand physically or by saying, shouting out verbally, feel free. But I'll start just to kind of get things going. I guess the first question I'm wondering is, what are the kind of challenges facing SEOs, purpose-driven businesses, values-led organizations? What do you think the kind of challenges around investments are that are unique to them compared to other SEOs or other businesses, sorry? And can I come to you with that first, Erika?
Yeah, can you put us on full screen just so we can see everyone? Is that?
Yes, I can.
Well, again, you know, I'd say we're at early stages, so I don't want to pretend I'm an expert in this, but I think we came up with sort of 5 things that we needed to be investment ready. And I think out of those, the one that people most struggle with is, how do I use money to grow my business? How does money help, and what do I use it for, and what do I spend it on? And we all think money will solve problems, but often it doesn't solve the problem that is the thing that's holding you back. So I feel I spend an awful lot of time with people who think they want money, figuring out what actually it is that they're going to spend it on if they get it in order to grow their business. But others on the panel might have very different answers to that. I'd be quite interested to hear.
So does anyone on the panel want to come in?
I'll comment on that. I mean, just in kind of my experience in working with early stage businesses looking to raise capital, I think one of the key barriers has been legal structures. So there's a kind of, you know, partly this is what the social investment market did, was say, you know, they were very kind of fixed on, you have to be a certain legal structure if you're going to be raising finance. The problem is, if you're not a company limited by shares, you can't raise equity finance. And so you're kind of stuck having to look for debt, which is great if you want to buy a building, not so great if you want to test some risky business areas and kind of, you know, trial stuff. So I think that kind of put, you know, social enterprises on a bit of a back foot. I think I notice as well, there's something of a kind of, there's a bias in the market. So if you go to an impact investor, well, any VC, and maybe you've got a large addressable market, but you say you're a social enterprise, automatically there's a kind of concept that maybe they're not going to be as commercially viable as any other business. So I'd always recommend people, you know, become a B Corp. There's a lot of kind of support in the venture market for B Corps, but social enterprises. So there's a bias against, you know, I think anyone who identifies as a social entrepreneur. And then I think the third thing that's kind of crucial is that often purpose-led organizations are maybe focusing on slightly smaller markets. So they're trying to address people when where there's a market failure, and it may be an area where, you know, if you're trying to help people who are underserved, there isn't as big a profit, or it's not a bigger market, and that can sometimes put off some investors. So I think those are some of the key barriers that I've come across.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Does any of the other panel want to come in? There's a hand up. Go on, Johnny.
Yeah, there's I guess the sort of opposite end of the spectrum to what Claire said is that not necessarily maybe for social enterprises and socially trading organizations, but if you're a regular kind of limited set up as a normal business, but you're trying to tackle something that's quite, you know, like a grand challenge, particularly I'm thinking of things in like climate, energy, agriculture, sustainability. Those industries typically have quite big cost barriers to entry anyway. You know, it's not as easy as, I mean, I'm not saying software businesses are easy, but you can start with, you know, very little kind of capital. You know, you don't need physical assets, but if you want to go and start something in like the, you know, energy derived from waste industry, or you want to do something on climate tech, you can require like hundreds of millions of pounds really quickly. So I think that can put people off as well a little bit.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Does anyone else want to respond to that before go to Nicholas? Is it? Do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I had a question actually. Is that the time for that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. My question was for Erika, and I suppose anyone else who wants to pick it up. Erika, if I can misquote you, you explained how you sort of refined what for you was the definition of what you wanted to do, and I wrote that you arrived at firms that reinvest the profit after cost into the community. How do you then handle growth in that scenario for said company that reinvests its profits after costs? Where do you set the bar of, well, I need this to grow, and so I'm not going to reinvest it in my community? And related to that, although that might take too long, how do you define community?
You're on mute, Erika.
For us at Kindred, we're definitely in the social trading space, and we're fairly new, and we're working at the early end of that market. So much of what we're building is a community or a movement across the city region. We've gone from being sort of nothing to about 500 organisations who are part of that now, who are supporting each other. For those people who perhaps like the tech growth business model, and Johnny will tell me I'm oversimplifying here, but you know, there is a form of tech growth business model where you set up a company, you grow it as fast as you can, and you sell it on and you take your profits. And that's probably not the end of the market we're interested in. We're probably much more interested in somebody who is, I mentioned Pat earlier, who's out in Knowsley, or Rosie, who's, you know, bringing a new approach to dementia care. She's completely rooted in that community. Yes, she wants to grow. Yes, she's multiplying the ventures, but her business model gives her a decent salary, gives all her staff a decent salary, reinvests in the business and delivers good. She's not looking at this stage in life to sell that business on. She may at some point do that, but I think by the time she got there, we would have seen our money in and come back. And all the commitment we're asking for her is to put some of that money back in the pot so that somebody else can have a go. Though we do say, if your business goes to the wall or you can't pay it back, then we'll come to an agreement. We don't want to see your business closed just because you can't pay us back. So we do have very generous terms. But the most money we've given out now is 100 grand.
Nicholas, hope that answers your question. Does anyone else want to come in on that before we move on? And if anyone else has got questions, feel free to unmute. If not, I'll go next. Mark, can I come to you next? I was obviously you're someone who's thought a lot about like how you kind of about the criteria for what makes a company ethical and what makes an investment ethical. Can you talk us through like what circa 5,000's process is or around that stuff, and how you do kind of measure that stuff and work that stuff out?
Yeah, sure. Just a quick comment on funding and you know, what are the difficulties in funding. I mean, the approach that we took is that, you know, why funding shouldn't necessarily be easy. You know, you're asking people to give you their money so you can grow your business. So, you know, funding shouldn't be easy. And I think we took the view that we had to build the best investment product, full stop. And the criteria they put on ourselves is we would only do impact related investing. So we have to match the functionality of our non-impact competition. We have to be as good as them, if not better. We have to price competitively. We have to be aggressive on those things, and then we bring in the impact criteria. So, you know, we're a for-profit limited company. We are a B Corp, but we are, you know, we're venture backed, and we're the stuff that Erika doesn't want to go near. But that's who we are. In terms of our process, so we're trying to get normal people to start investing for their future. You know, you have interest rates are now at 0.5%. Inflation's at 7% in April, apparently. Will be around that. So you can't really build wealth by saving cash for yourself. And ultimately, whether you like it or not, you have to have a pot of money to be able to retire comfortably and maintain a lifestyle. So we're trying to build investment products that are suitable for that. So we only deal with listed stock market type investments, suitable to put in an ISA or a pension. And you know, we invest in those liquid type businesses so that people ultimately can choose when they access their money in future. So there's not a liquidity problem there for people. We then start to build portfolios around two main themes. So one is people and one is planet. And then we look at trying to find investment funds that align with or are closely aligned to one or potentially more than one of the UN SDGs. Now, not all of the UN SDGs are suitable for the type of investing we do. There's not a fund that does peacekeeping, for example. But there are many funds out there that do things like education, clean energy, sustainable food, products related to smart cities and things like this. So we then look at those funds, we interrogate their methodologies, we make sure that they effectively do what they say on the tin. We also then make sure that the underlying companies in those funds are of sufficient size and scale and liquidity so that people can trade in and out of them easily. And ultimately, we've tried to build a product that is anti-day trading, is anti-gambling, is anti all of those sort of bad words that people associate when it comes to investing. So we're not crypto, we don't allow people to day trade, we don't allow people to buy single line companies. We effectively put parameters on the app, so no matter what selection you make, you'll end up in a risk balanced, diversified portfolio. We encourage people to top up regularly and those type of things. So we see it as twofold, really. We want to make sure that the underlying investments are not just ethical, i.e. they're not just excluding tobacco and gambling and these type of things, but they're actually aligned to some sort of positive contribution. And then we also want to build a product that is built for financial inclusion, so it's easily accessible for people who've maybe not invested before. And it also encourages sensible and proper investment behavior so that people actually have a good chance of building their investment pot over time. So, you know, they can't sort of get their fingers burnt by going into a meme stock or something like that and losing a load of money. So that's where we see our impact as sort of that financial inclusion and sort of trying to change the industry that we're in. And then we have a methodology and a process to ensure that the underlying investments where people are putting their money are doing what they say on the tin effectively.
That's really good, thanks. I think I'll just, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to stick your hands up. I think we'll have maybe one more and then go on to the breakout rooms. I will give opportunities just for people to put hands up. If not, could you, and I heard you mention financial inclusion there, could you possibly just talk a little bit on what that means to you, financial inclusion, and could I also open that up to the rest of the panel as well, please?
Yeah, I mean, in the context of our business, it's about making a sensible investment product understandable and accessible for anyone with an amount of money that they can afford to invest. So our minimum investment is £5. Obviously, if you put £5 in, don't expect to retire with much more than £5. But the idea is that we break down that barrier of having to start with a lot of money before you invest. So you can grow your investment pot as you sort of have more surplus income or you have more money to put aside for the future. You know, ultimately, financial inclusion, the barrier of our financial inclusion is quite high, if you like, because in order to invest at all, you have to be sort of free from, you know, you have to be able to meet your day-to-day expenses, and you have to be, you know, relatively affluent just to start thinking about putting extra money to one side. So within the context of the fact that we are an investment product, so people have to have some, you know, people have to be in a fairly affluent position to start using us. We wanted to make the barrier to that as low as possible to get as many people investing for the future as possible.
That's great. Could I come to Erika next? Would you mind answering that same question? What does financial inclusion mean to you and Kindred?
Yeah, I suppose almost to follow Matt, actually, we probably want to make the people who will have enough money to invest in Matt's product, but make sure there are more of them. You know, people who have enough salary to save up, to buy a house, to have a pension, to do what it is that you want to do for you and your kids. And I think the thing about socially trading organisations is they tend to emerge and operate in those places that other businesses don't, because there is some form of market failure. That's not always, but it is predominantly in those places where people respond in a different way to a gap in the market with something unusual and therefore innovative. So in terms of financial inclusion, I think it's, you know, again, to use a sort of quote or a story, Kirsten and Liam, who set up Make Liverpool, they talk about why they set it up, but they also talk about the privilege they had in setting it up. And it was literally living in parents' houses rent-free while they set up a business. And not everybody has that privilege. And so it's, you know, that what we mean by financial inclusion can be very, very different from one person to another person to another person. Rosie, who runs Me to You, who I mentioned about the dementia centre, you know, she was a child carer of somebody with dementia, and that's why she set up the dementia centre. But she was working, when I first met her, she was working full-time as a nurse and put her house up for mortgage despite having 2 kids and being a single parent in order to set up a dementia centre, you know, and was running the dementia centre while working full-time as a nurse because she couldn't afford to do it another way. And that's why I said earlier about risk. Anybody tell me that business is high risk? Well, I know it isn't, because I know Rosie ain't going to let that fail. That business is going to succeed and is now doing very well. But financial inclusion for her, she made it happen for herself before I ever met her. But it meant putting her family's house at risk. So I think it means really different things to different people.
That's great. Clarke, I've come to you next, please.
Yeah, I think for me, I look at it in terms of who can access investment and what founders can access investment. And, you know, it's still very much skewed towards male founders, all male founding teams that are accessing investment. I mean, it's still very low, the number of women founders that are managed to access sort of risk capital, such as angels and from VCs, something like 10%. I don't know what the figures are right now. And the same with co-founding teams with ethnic kind of founders, minority founders. So I think there's still a lot more work to do in terms of, you know, how investment teams at investors are kind of, you know, looking at investment opportunities and how they assess teams.
And Johnny, can I just come to you with that lastly?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of something that's not really already been said, but just to kind of underline some of the points that have already been made. You know, there are these disparities between certain groups of people. You know, the statistics show bluntly that there are huge disparities across like lines of race, gender, you know, geography, when it comes to access and funding, be that for a business or, you know, be that for things like banking, etc. You know, huge swathes of different parts of communities actually can end up being unbanked, you know, and that's essential for day-to-day life. I can't imagine not having a bank account. I guess, you know, one of the angles I'm particularly interested in and what I spend a lot of time thinking about is particularly with how everything's kind of gone hybridized or a bit more remote. You know, you are truly as a business owner, founder, you know, director, you're in a global market, not just for customers, but also for talent and for access and finance. And, you know, I'm definitely beginning to see a lot of the smaller businesses like in the north of the UK look far beyond, like, you know, their regions and their towns to access investment, because inevitably some of these like super funds and things like that, which, you know, if you are trying to do something ethical or you're trying to do something really quite grand and quite difficult, you can actually have better success reaching out to places like New York, Silicon Valley, obviously the big one in tech, but places like, you know, Berlin, and the Nordics as well. You know, the amount of like climate specific funds, gender specific funds and things like that operate in regions that people might not initially think about, is definitely something to bear in mind if they're not having a lot of success locally, or they're finding that, you know, they're not getting good terms, for example, from a local funder. So I guess that's just, you know, my additional 2 cents of the already absolutely spot on points that have already been made.
That's fine, thanks. Yeah, I think it's important that we ask that, because obviously I think a big part of Firestarters is about trying to make business more inclusive and trying to open up these conversations to people in groups that aren't usually having them. I think we'll move into breakout rooms now, if that's okay with everyone. I'm just going to share my screen again. And then could I actually pass over to you, Ruth, to talk through this bit whilst I sort the breakout room list?
Certainly, I can distract whilst you do the difficult bit of putting everyone into the rooms. So for anyone who's not done a Firestarters event before, what we tend to do is have sort of interesting, stimulating conversation at the beginning, as we've just done. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. Then we take all of that interesting thoughts, all those interesting thinking that we've just done, and then we put people into smaller, concentrated groups. And we basically encourage you to have a bit of discussion and debate. And from that, our team create actions that people can do so that you can feel like you're actually moving forward with things that you've tried to do by attending this event. One of the big purposes of Firestarters is not just talk, it's action as well. So these smaller rooms we're about to break out into, that they're basically the rooms that are going to enable you to do that. You will have one of the speakers from our event today in your room, as well as a matchstick. Speakers, please don't be terrified. You will have a matchstick guiding you through the process. We will be the ones recording everything. All you have to be is dazzling hosts, and we'll be there to guide you. So what we'd like to do now is talk about what are the challenges around ethical investment, what are the opportunities in ethical investment, what tips and best practice can you share around ethical investment? Our speakers have done a really good job so far of saying some, useful things or point us towards some useful resources. If anyone who is not a panel speaker is aware of these things, please do share. The point is that we help people collaborate and get these kinds of things off the ground. So tell us what you know. At the end of the event, we'll be collecting all of the resources that get mentioned, so you have it to refer back to should you want to for any of your own business planning. And then also, what changes would make ethical investment easier for you? Particularly, I'm a founder. I'm someone that has always had discussions with my co-founder, Greg, who's also on the call, about if we would take investment. It's interesting hearing Erika say, don't worry about where it comes from, as long as it does good. That suddenly changed my thinking around everything. And I feel Greg's going to disagree with me, but we can come back to that. So yes, those are the things we're going to talk about. The matchsticks that are in the room with you, we've got a Miro board that we're going to share with you and record everyone's thoughts so you can see what's been written down as well to make sure it's accurate to what you've said. And then everything that we record today will be shared with everyone who took part. We'll also be doing a roundup blog post being written by my wonderful colleague Faye, who's also on the call. Hello, Faye. So all the resources and stuff you need will be in Faye's post. So should you need to refer back to it, it'll be there and we'll share it with all of you. Aaron, is that enough of me talking whilst you do organising? Do you need more? You're still on mute. Do you need me? Oh, still on mute.
Sorry, I was just saying I probably need another minute.
Another minute, okay. Can I, is it easy for you to switch out of presentation mode?
Yeah, probably, yeah. Actually.
Thank you. I'll do a show of hands exercise here. As a show of hands, who in here is a company founder or decision maker? Who in here is a company founder? So we've got Ian, we've got Matt, we've got Louisa, Greg, we've got quite a few people. Who here, Dijon as well, thank you Dijon. Who here is someone who's interested in making an investment? Who is someone that wants to invest in a good ethical business? We've got Erika, we've got Johnny, we've got Louisa, we've got Matthew. We've got quite a few people. So that's really lovely to see. It's good to see that there's, I don't know if this is the right terminology for this, but circular economy. It's good to see that we've had a conversation. Hopefully it will produce something off the back of it. That's really wonderful. Erika, go on.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting opportunity there. We are talking about it as Kindred, but I think some of the points that, I lost everybody on the screen, but it's almost some of the points Matt made saying, oh, I do the things Erika wouldn't want to go near. But I think what there is a landscape of investment out there, but it's actually quite hard to navigate.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's really struck me is how businesses are investing in other businesses. And again, this is like a stat off some article I read, but small businesses have more money sitting in their bank accounts than almost anybody else in the UK that isn't working. And so I think we're hoping, as we develop and interested in doing this with other people as well at a local level, to be encouraging people to invest in each other. So there's a handful of the socially trading organisations I work with where one of their suppliers has invested in one case. In another case, somebody who did very well themselves is now investing back in others who work in the same sector as them. A couple of small, almost high street businesses invested in each other. And I do think there might be an opportunity for us in the region to just positively encourage that between us at the different levels that we operate and across that landscape.
Definitely, yes. I love the idea of businesses on the call being able to support each other that way, and being able to invest in each other. We've got a sort of secret group that we meet with, including Liam and Kirsten from Make, who were mentioned before, as well as Paul Myers from Farm Urban and Chelsea from Innovate Her. We've created an informal group between us called Peer Leaders, and we basically get together and figure out the things we can't figure out on our own. And it's exceptionally helpful. So I would hope there's a future where we can all invest in each other. That feels like a good idea. Aaron, how are you getting on?
All right, I think we're ready.
Cool. See you all in your breakout rooms, everyone. Thank you.
That's everyone, yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the main room.
Hiya.
Hi.
Hi there.
Hi. Thanks, everyone, for saying hey. I always feel like when you're a big Zoom call, you're like, I can't say anything.
Yeah, I think I was cut off in the middle of thanking everyone in my breakout room.
Greg says thank you, everyone in his breakout room.
Is everyone back? Yeah, I think they are. Yeah, welcome back, everybody. You know, we're 1 minute over already, so if anyone does need to leave or she, feel free. But just before we do, if everyone wants to hang on for a minute, I'm just going to ask everyone about the Matchstick members of our Matchstick team that were in each of the breakout rooms, just feedback on 1 point, I think, from your groups, if that's okay. Ruth, could I come to you first, please?
Yeah, sure. We had a really excellent conversation in my room. Thank you for all the people in my room. I think the main thing that came out was an education piece. From a founder's perspective, it is not obvious where you get this support or how you make yourself educated on where you might find the support. So my main point, and there's lots of things we talked about in my room that we'll share in the blog post after this, that there is that support coming. So we can be the people that direct you to that support, as someone who's attended this event. But outside of that, the main thing was founders don't know where to go to get support. They need to know. That's my main point.
That was great. Greg, can I come to you next, please?
I think a similar point came out in our room. I think the bit that I'd probably raise as a key thing was this concept of like there's perhaps a clash of cultures around finance and ethics. And if you're from sort of a background based in kind of ethical principles, how treating these kind of things in terms of investment in finance and return can seem at odds with those kind of principles, but also in terms of like the kinds of language and the way that people think. So it can be quite intimidating. A lot of kind of business investment jargon that doesn't necessarily sit well with people who have perhaps come from a more socially minded background where they're looking at the impact around people and, you know, that kind of human aspect.
Yeah, that's great, thanks. And I think Erika just put the link for Kindred in chat. If anyone else has got anything else they want to share in the chat before they go, feel free to share links and stuff like that. And Jack, can I come to you next, please, for your...
Yeah, I think one of our main points was quite similar to Greg's about jargon when it comes to investments. And when you've got a business that might be dealing with engineering, that another industry that has a lot of its own jargon, and then you've got an investment company which almost has their own language, and if you're speaking two different languages, it's very difficult to know if your values are aligned, because you might literally not understand. Like I beg your pardon, I forgot who mentioned it, was saying like the word execute in investment and engineering are two wildly different things, so it's very difficult to know where if the partnership is right.
Okay, thanks for that, Jack. That was really good. And lastly, my kind of feedback from our group. We did discuss similar things around like financial inclusion and even kind of financial literacy and stuff like that. But I think the biggest takeaway I'll take from our group was the don't trust the financial advice on TikTok, apparently. We talked a little bit about like basically where people are getting their investment advice from, and thinking about like, you know, basically that there's a lot of rubbish out there. And also, again, coming back to them points about like how do people recognize when something is, you know, bad information or good information. And that's fine, Johnny. Thanks for coming. So yeah, see you later, Johnny. So yeah, I'd say the biggest takeaway from ours was about like where people get their information and where you kind of reach new audiences with information about investing and trying to engage people who aren't already engaged into investing. Okay, that is it. I'll just share my screen to share the last slide before we go. You'll bear with me. Okay, so that is, as I say, that's it. So thank you everyone for coming today. I think it's been one of the best sessions yet, if you ask me. Don't say so myself. Yeah, I think it's been really good. I think it's really been some really good, interesting conversations, and a lot of, I feel like I've learned a lot today as well. I feel like there's definitely some information I'm leaving with that I didn't have when we first come on the call. So who should you get in contact with? So you can get in touch with me or Ruth about anything to do with Firestarters. If anyone's got any wants introductions to anyone who's been on the call today, or you know, one has got an idea for an event they want to do with Firestarters or anything like that, then feel free to get in touch. All my contact details are there, but everyone should have them from the invites and stuff anyway. So yeah, feel free to get in touch. And thank you again for coming.
Aaron, I'll be in touch.
All right, Ray. Nice one.
Nice
Yeah,
one for inviting me. Enjoyed it.
No worries.
Thanks
for coming. Thanks for coming.
Thanks,
I
Ray.
learned a lot. So thanks, guys. Learned a lot in a small amount of time.
Oh,
so
good.
Just
That's
want
what
to
we
thank you again.
Thanks, Abba.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no problem.
Thanks for coming. I'll catch up.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to everyone.
Evenings.
Thanks. I appreciate the time, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Ian.